Started. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Hello and good morning, everyone. Today, for the purpose of the scientific interview, I am elated to have with me an eminent icon in the theoretical physics community of the world, let alone India, Professor Aninda Sinha. And he is currently an associate professor in the Center for High Energy Physics at the prestigious Indian Institute of Science, where he's been teaching and directing students since 2010. His research primarily focused on string theory, but he has also published on several other topics of theoretical high energy physics. Okay, so excelling at science since a young age, Professor Sinha placed first not just in Jadavpur University, Kolkata, where he did his bachelor's, but also in Cambridge University, United Kingdom, where he completed his master's in applied mathematics. He then went on to pursue a doctoral degree at Cambridge, supervised by none other than Professor Michael Green, a celebrated pioneer of string theory. Professor Sinha then researched as a postdoctoral fellow in Cambridge and Perimeter Institute. He's also won quite some accolades as well: Ramanujan Fellowship, Sohan Jayanti Fellowship, and the ICTP Prize as well. And his most recent honor was the 2019 Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize. His academic career also involved like enlightening a substantial number of research scholars, which includes my PhD advisor and our very own faculty member, Professor Amin Nizami. All right, so I can go on and on about his accomplishments and achievements, but might take a while. Professor Sinha, it's an honor to have you here, and I sincerely thank you for accepting the invitation for this interview.
Thank you, Aditya. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so shall we begin the interview then?
Yes.
Okay, right. So the first thing that I wanted to ask was rather simplistically, what motivated you to pursue research?
Um, well, there are quite a few things. I come from a sort of an academic family because my uncle is a physicist. My father did his undergraduate as well as his postgraduate degree in physics and geophysics, respectively. My grandfather was quite a well-known economist, and then he was also part of the first post-independence Bengal government.
I see.
So in that sense, we have a tradition in that sense. So there was some peer pressure or whatever it's called. It runs in the family, so to speak. So and of course, I was lucky to be in a good school where at least we had a very good maths teacher. So you get
Hmm.
you get programmed in some sense
Yep.
subconsciously into thinking or being interested in science. And so science was something that I always wanted to do, probably as long as I remember. I mean, maybe from class 6 onwards, I always wanted to have a career in science.
Yeah,
And maybe seeing that my uncle was a very famous physicist and he's a very well-known physicist, I thought that okay, this is what I want to do.
I see. Okay. Right. So your doctoral thesis was on aspects of 2B plane wave string theory.
Yes.
How did you decide on your research topic, or more specifically, your PhD thesis research question?
Yeah, so when you do a PhD, you you're quite reliant on your advisor to
Yeah.
provide direction. So at that point of time, this plane wave BMN correspondence was a very trendy topic because this was a very solvable part of the ADS-CFT correspondence. And you must have heard that the ADS-CFT correspondence is one of the profound developments in theoretical physics over
Yep.
the last several years. And my advisor was interested in this at that point of time. He was, of course, interested in other things as well. And to be honest, he didn't suggest this as a thesis topic. So I remember that when I first had a meeting with him, so we met in the damned cafeteria. It's a good place to have discussions. And then we sat down and he told me that he outlined for me what problems he was interested in. One problem that he said that he was interested in was to calculate the two-loop four-graviton scattering amplitude in type 2B string theory.
I see.
And of course, because I was very naive, I said, yeah, fine, I'll do it. And then he said, oh, if you manage to do this problem without actually understanding how difficult it was an extraordinarily hard problem. It takes around 500 pages of calculations to
I
actually
see.
solve it fully. And so anyway, so that is how I started. But he also told me another thing, that according to him, the ideal PhD student is somebody who finds his own problem and solves it.
Oh,
So he encouraged independence in
I
that
see.
sense. So it was something that theoretical physics is a funny thing. You are doing a random walk most of the time, so you're looking
Yeah.
at solvable things. Maybe you feel that this might be a good problem to solve and write a paper on. So as a beginning student, you talk to your advisor and figure out whether something is interesting enough to publish or not, and then that's what you do. And so after I wrote my first paper, which was not on this topic, it was a problem suggested by Michael Green. It was on a particular very high derivative term in type 2b string theory.
Hmm.
I sort of lost interest in this direction. I
Hmm.
went to him, and I told him that this is not something that I want to continue working on. And because Michael was Michael, and I really respect him and I sort of adore him because of that, he told me that fine, I'll help you write up this paper, and then you can start thinking about other things.
Hmm.
Uh,
I see.
there was a risk that he would shout at me and say, "What do you mean you're not going to work on?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
Um, oh, okay, so this very closely connects to my next question. How exactly do you define a relationship of a PhD scholar with his or her advisor?
So for me, it depends on who you are. I mean, I've seen
Hmm.
different kinds of relations, but for me, he was almost like an academic father to me because we had
Okay.
lots of discussions, and he helped make my career as well. I mean, he was very encouraging, so in that sense. So yeah, so but so far as my relationship with my students are concerned, it's somewhere between being a big brother and being a sort of mentor,
Hmm.
something like that. So I'm quite close to my students. I actually give them career advice, and every student is different. I know that if
Hmm.
I shout at some student, he's going to get encouraged and he's going to work harder. And if I there are other students who, if I shout at them, they are going to sort of be crestfallen and not
Hmm.
become depressed. So you have to really
Hmm.
understand the personality of the student, what works.
Yeah, individual. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So, how exactly do you manage your day or week or a general schedule, like with research, teaching, how to like say, activities and so on? And how would you suggest a doctoral student time his or her day?
So for a doctoral student, and of course for when you advance in your career, the way that you manage your day becomes different. But for a doctoral student, I would say that you should devote quite a lot of time doing a lot of background reading. That's a
Hmm.
very big essential part of your research, because don't imagine, and this is something that I always tell my students, that don't imagine that I'm going to tell you I'm going to know the answer to a particular question.
Hmm.
I want to foray into topics that I don't know, and I expect my students to teach me.
Right. Right. Right.
So that happened when I went into the conformal bootstrap program as well, and in fact, I learned a lot from my students.
Hmm.
And because of the fact that I'm a bit more experienced, maybe I'll be able to. I have a better feel for the directions,
Right.
which one is a good direction to pursue. But I think a PhD student should devote a substantial amount of time reading not only established lines that is that are there in physics. So, for example, I would say that if you're doing string theory, then you should know a lot of quantum field theory,
Right.
not only from standard textbooks like Matthew Schwartz or Srednicki, but also you go and learn about solvable quantum field theories in 2 dimensions.
Hmm.
You read aspects of symmetry by Sidney Coleman and so on, and build a big repertoire about quantum field theory, because after all, that is what we use. That is a standard accepted framework to discover to describe nature. So that kind of background reading, the breadth that you
Hmm.
really you need to develop a breadth of knowledge, because then you'll have a better feel as to what is an interesting direction to pursue. Because if you just focus on the problem that your advisor has suggested, that may
Right.
be a very narrow thing and that may be a doable thing, but then you won't develop a perspective.
Hmm.
So a student should develop a substantial amount of time doing this background reading, and also the rest of the time working on the problem that he has been assigned. So some
Right.
balance between that, maybe 50%, 50%, like that. That has to be that is the way to follow.
Right. But how would you schedule a day? Like how many hours would you suggest denoting to
Yeah,
work
it's
and so on?
difficult to say. I mean, when I was a student, it depends. Depended. I mean, because you're doing the research in theoretical physics, and probably you know by now that when you're doing research in theoretical physics, most of the time you're stuck.
Yeah.
So you've been assigned a problem, and you try out a few things. Invariably, the first month or so, you're going to go in the wrong direction, probably do wrong calculations, and then you realize that, oh, whatever I did for the last month was a waste, because this is not the way to think about it. This is the way to think about it. So then you go back and do some soul searching, maybe take a day off, go and play tennis or watch a movie, something, and then you come back, and then
Hmm.
have a fresh perspective, it's very essential that
Hmm.
you don't have this fixed notion that I have to work and I have to do reading and I have to do this calculation from this time to this time, because if you don't have that flexibility, you're sacrificing creativity.
I see.
So the famous mathematician in Cambridge, G.H. Hardy,
Yeah.
he used to work for 4 hours a day. He used to say that it's beyond me. I cannot be creative beyond this. And he used to go off to play cricket from 4 p.m. onwards. I mean, this is there in the Mathematician's Apology by G.H. Hardy. You should go and read it. So so it depends on from person to person. I mean, some people work extraordinarily hard. Maybe they work continuously for 3 4 days in a row. And for example, Nima Arkani Hamid is one of them. So
Yeah.
he apparently does not sleep sometimes. So so it depends from person to person. And if you feel that you can be more creative and more productive with a particular schedule, you should adjust it like that.
Okay. Right. Thank you. So, okay, is there essentially any difference between researching in theoretical and experimental physics?
Huge difference. If you're doing, because my wife is an experimentalist, she's a very
Uh,
well-known experimentalist at that. And when you're doing experiments, you should be prepared to go for the long haul, because even if the experiment is well defined, your apparatus may not cooperate with you, and
hmm.
you might have to sort of keep fine tuning, figuring out what, doing a lot of um, a lot of debugging
Yep.
at the apparatus level, and that takes a lot of time, a huge amount of time, and in fact, it might run into years to finish an experiment. So I think if you want to, so the way that the theorist would work is a bit different from the way that an experimentalist would work.
Hmm.
An experimentalist requires a lot of discipline, a lot of patience, and a lot of hard work as well. Of course, those are the same qualities that a theorist should also have. But at the same time, we are in a sort of luckier situation, because we can say that if some line is not working, we can just go in slightly of a slightly different direction, and we can get the
All right. So I'll tie the next question with the previous one. Is so you told me that there's a huge difference between researching and experimental and theoretical physics. How is teaching experimental and theoretical physics different, and why is there a disparity, as far as I can tell, in India? Why is there a disparity in the number of scholars joining theory and the experimental department?
Oh, these are great questions. So these are very questions that are very close to my heart. So the reason why people are naturally swayed into doing theory over experiments is because of the grassroots facilities that we provide in India. So, for example, I can tell you, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I've got a 10-year-old daughter, so I know exactly. I think I have some uh, reason to say the statements that I'm about to make. So you see, most of the students follow one of these standard boards, like either it's CBSE or some state board
Yep.
education system. And these are fine. These are good boards. People, the people who actually decide on what topics to cover and so on, they put in a lot of effort, and they have done a fantastic job so far. But still, the emphasis is still on the theoretical side. And there's a very simple reason to it. It's very difficult to come up with the infrastructure in a standard school,
Yep.
especially if it is not one of the private schools or something. It's
Hmm.
very difficult to come up with the infrastructure uh, to do experiments which involves all the students. So, for example, if you're in a standard Kendriya Vidyalaya, which has around 55 students in a section, yeah, you cannot possibly think of having a lab which has 55 apparatus. So it's
Yeah.
always shared. So it's always shared. So maybe 4 or 5 students are doing the same experiment, and sometimes even they don't get to do the experiment hands on.
Hmm.
So uh, so that actually creates a fear in the student's mind to do some fiddling around with the apparatus. So if you don't have this playing around,
Yeah.
if you don't play around too much, you're not going to have this comfort factor with the apparatus.
Yep.
And so the problem starts at a grassroots level. So, for
Yeah.
example, if we change a light bulb, we call the electrician. We the simple things. I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't know how to actually install a 3-pin plug in your apartment yourself. You probably would go to the electrician and tell him that you come and do it. So
Right.
these are the things, these hands-on simple things we are scared to do. We are not encouraged to do either. We have seen
Hmm.
our parents do the same thing. And so, so the hands-on education is not there.
Mm.
And so automatically the emphasis on is on maths, on the well established flow charts that mathematics provides to us, that okay, and there's a structure. Mathematics in some sense, because of the fact that it has more structure, it's easier to teach, it's easier to actually educate somebody. But also, I mean, there's a flip side to it, because there are creative areas of mathematics.
Yeah.
We are not excelling in the creative areas of mathematics either. I mean, we don't have any Fields medalists, for example.
Yeah.
We have good mathematicians, but not in that league. So
Mm.
somewhere we are actually sacrificing creativity, and that this is starting at a very, very grassroots level.
Yeah. I completely
So
agree.
yeah, so till we fix this, there is this thing called the national education policy.
Yeah, the new thing.
So they're trying to do that, but it will take time. I mean, I don't think
Mm.
there is going to be a change in the scenario before
Mm.
the next decade or next 2 decades.
All right.
So that is why you have a disparity, because I did my undergraduate in India. I know the state of the labs, so the
Mm.
kind of
Yeah.
experiments that we know. And then I went to Cambridge. I also did experiments there. I saw the labs there. It's a huge heaven and hell difference. I mean, you get a culture shock. So after I saw the first lab that my director of studies told me to go and spend a day in the lab, I said that no, this is not for me, because I have to retrain myself, and it's quite difficult for me to retrain myself as an experimentalist.
Hmm. That is true.
But it's a big mistake, because I
Hmm.
think it's very important that you learn experiments, you know the nuances of experiments. Eh,
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Right. So theoretical physicists are sometimes considered, philosophers in the sense that they don't really have technical skills, right? Except they have the mathematical and computational skills or the deductive reasoning skills. How would you suggest a theorist find a job after their PhD?
Um, yes. So I think I guess you're asking that does it have to be in academia, or it can be somewhere else?
Exactly.
So there
Precisely.
are other areas where a theoretical physicist could make himself useful. I mean, there are, especially when it deals with interdisciplinary
Hmm.
research like biology or complex systems, complex the study of complex phenomena. And there, I think a theoretical physicist is always going to be in demand, because the way that a theoretical physicist thinks is quite different.
Hmm.
I mean, many of the major discoveries in biology were made by people trained in physics. So, for example, the DNA was the structure of the DNA was discovered in the Cavendish labs
Yeah.
by physicists,
Yep.
people trained in physics. So there is a history of this kind. So, in fact, there are labs, biological labs, who look out for trained PhDs in theoretical physics to
I see.
do research in mathematical biology. My senior, who was maybe 2 or 3 years my senior in Cambridge, who did his PhD with Michael Green, moved to biology, for that matter of fact.
Hmm.
And so there has been precedence. So there are areas where I think theorists can be useful. One thing is that I think at least in many universities, not just in India but also abroad, the job prospects that a theoretical physicist can have are not properly highlighted. So when
Exactly.
you get when you actually train yourself to be a theoretical physicist, you sort of think mentally that you have to do research in theoretical physics after this,
Hmm.
without actually realizing that there are other things, other ways to make yourself useful.
Hmm.
uh, and this is something that I feel one should improve upon, not just in India but anywhere else in the world. Maybe in India more so, because I think we have a mindset that if we should continue, there is a continuity problem in India, in the sense that we feel that we should continue doing whatever we started.
Yeah.
If I started doing theoretical physics in my research, I should continue with theoretical physics, and otherwise it's a failure on my part. That
Exactly.
kind of mindset has to change, because that is not the point. Many people have actually become successful researchers, Nobel Prize winning researchers. Venki Ramakrishnan, for example, is a good
Hmm.
example, where you were trained in physics, but you actually contributed more in chemistry.
Yeah. Right.
So
This hits hard. Like this hits very close to home as well.
yes.
Okay. Uh, right. Okay. So the next question might be a little harsh, but and I apologize for that. But it's coming from personal experience. Like I've been personally asked this as well. So a considerable portion of the high energy physics community considers string theory to be a dead end, right? A theory with no experimental backing. How do you justify researching in such a field?
Yeah. So one has to first ask what do you mean by string theory. So for me, so for example, the last several papers, if you look at my career from 2015 onwards, has been in field theory,
Hmm.
in quantum field theory, trying to understand quantum field theory more, but keeping in mind that there might be some connection with the structure of string theory. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So there are calculations in quantum field theory which we know that quantum field theory cannot be the final framework. There are disadvantages of that framework, and people like Weinberg, more recently and in the past, people like Dirac, they they very publicly said that the quantum field theory is still evolving, and there is some other framework that is going to encompass quantum field theory. So Weinberg, for
Exactly.
example, was a super supporter of string theory. He felt that string theory is the way to go because it dealt with quantum gravity and so on. So one thing I think any theoretical physicist is going to working on the fundamental laws of nature is going to agree that without incorporating gravity at the quantum level, or actually saying that we do not require a quantum theory of gravity, which I don't think anybody is going to say that we do not require a quantum theory of gravity.
Right.
Uh, the people are going to still search for a framework which is capable of describing quantum gravity along with the other quantum phenomena.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, whether it is string theory, whether part of string theory survives, or whether it's something completely different, I don't know. But you have to search for laws which connect up with known things. So for example, if you're saying that I'm going to redo quantum field theory, you have your framework has to be capable of reproducing established results in
Hmm.
quantum field theory. It
Right.
cannot be something that you say that, oh, this is a completely new conceptual framework, but I can't explain it, say Compton scattering. So your
Yeah.
framework has to be able to explain quantum Compton
Hmm.
scattering. It should be able to explain Lamb shift. These things have to be there. On top of that, you have to ask that, okay, what extra thing am I getting? So can I probe the ultraviolet? Can I probe
Right.
what is happening as we keep increasing the energy scales? These kind of questions your framework should be able to do. When you actually have such a framework, and if you see the signature of string theory, maybe it's some indirect signature of string theory emerging, then you say that, yeah, okay, I mean, the string theory is completely relevant because there is some hint that it is going to that there is going to be an extra length scale, there is going to be some fundamental excitations which
Hmm.
looks like extended objects and so on. So this should emerge naturally. Part of the criticism that the string community faces is completely justified. Uh, it's justified because I think there is a huge part of the community which tries to shirk away from the question as to why is this experimentally relevant. They say that we see beautiful mathematical structure,
Yeah.
and then when you actually say that, okay, if you are seeing beautiful mathematical structure, why are you not in the maths department? When you actually say that, if you talk to a mathematician, you're going to say, are the calculations that you're doing rigorous enough mathematically? So that is why I think this question, I think many people do not address. They shirk away from because of the fact that they have permanent positions. Uh, and I think the major problem is that there are doable fundamental questions uh, that are still left pending. And I think that is what lot of people actually criticize, that why aren't you working on these problems rather than working on something that you don't know whether it's going to be actually a law of nature or eventually or not. So, it's of course a matter of taste, that you could say that, no, I really want to work on a quantum theory of gravity. String theory is the best bet, so let's keep pushing at it. On the other hand, you could also say that, no, I mean, I am not being able to connect with nature. I should go and try to see whether I can connect up with nature. So
Right.
I think the problem is that somewhere, somewhere we do not understand string theory well enough to connect up with nature, and at the same time, because of this criticism that we are continuously facing, we are trying to apply string theory, or we are trying to stretch it to the maximum limit and apply to scenarios where probably we shouldn't be applying them to, and as a result of which, the formal developments that are needed to
Hmm.
to take the subject uh, to that level of understanding where we can apply it to nature is not happening,
Hmm.
because we do not have enough intelligent people, or enough number of people who are working on the formal aspects. So it's a catch-22 situation so far as string theory is
Yeah.
concerned. It is going to remain like that for a long time.
I see. All right. Okay. Okay. Um, The next question is a little personal. Do you feel content with your research, like satisfied with your research and your profession in general?
Yeah, I would say that I'm very content with the research directions that I'm pursuing currently. So I think for reasons, because I'm working on this thing called the bootstrap. So it's,
Yeah,
first of all, it's relevant in quantum field theory. So I can say that I can calculate the critical exponents of water, and nobody can say that that is irrelevant, because of course you can measure them. And at the same time, I'm trying to understand the structure of quantum field theory, trying to sort of, big goal is to try to see whether one can connect up with some superstructure. Maybe it's string theory, maybe something else, I don't know. But you have to keep your mind open, see whether you can get indications of new things
exactly.
like that. And so I feel that it's very exciting. Land up making connections with areas of physics, theoretical physics, and areas of mathematics which you never knew existed. At the same time, you land up finding old papers by Wigner, papers by Heisenberg, which sort of hinted at these kind of things. So that way you find that, these people, these founding forefathers also were thinking about these kind of things, but they missed this, and I can make this connection. So that
Yeah,
makes it super exciting.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think that kind of research always pleases me.
Oh. The next question is very related to this, and I think it's also related to what you just said. Is do you have a recollection of a moment in your career where you found or discovered something, an equation or a formula, and you were like genuinely awestruck, and you
Yeah,
thought this made all the years of training worthwhile?
yeah, it has happened a couple of 2 or 3 times, I would say. So right there, from my PhD days, there was this problem that it's called something called plane wave string field theory.
I see.
And it was we had to sort of calculate something called a cubic vertex, or depending on which the thing you're calculating, it could be
Hmm.
the open string vertex as well. And so it required us, and we were working with just there were 3 students who are, so myself and somebody called Sakura and somebody called James. So we were working together, and then I realized that we could extract the information by looking at the pole structure and zero structure of the equations. And it worked, and it gave us new kinds of we invented a new function called gamma function with a branch cut. So usually the usual gamma function has poles but no branch cuts,
Yeah,
and the gamma function with the branch cut, actually the size of the cut was related to the amount of flux that was there in the background, and so on. So it was quite pleasing to interpret it in that language. So that was the first time that we that I had this epiphany that,
yeah.
wow. And it happened like that. You're sitting on the table, and then suddenly there's a spark, and you just jump up the table, and then you go and run to your friends. So in this instance, I ran to James and told him that, look, we know this. Do you think this is going to work? And James was an expert mathematician, and says, yeah, yes. I mean, there's something called Liouville's theorem, and if you apply Liouville's theorem, then one should be able to prove uniqueness and so on. So, and that was a great moment. And but later on, I think more closer to maybe in 2015, I was working with my student called Lolsen. So we were trying to understand the bootstrap, and
Hmm.
then we were looking at epsilon expansion, something called the epsilon expansion, in the way that Polyakov had formulated very early in the 1970s.
Right,
And we understood the structure of the equations, and we found that actually you just don't you're not restricted to just the leading order, which was where Polyakov had stopped, but you could actually systematically get higher orders, and these higher orders are like higher loop Feynman diagrams, and we were
right.
getting these information by just solving algebraic equations. So when we realized that, that was like a brilliant, I mean, some really nice moment where, for a moment, and I think you must have these moments where you feel that maybe the Nobel Prize is very within reach.
Right.
And so you have these exciting moments, and then you realize that, no, no, no. I mean, cool down. It's not.
Sounds really exciting though.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, that sounded very exciting and very nice.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So I think it's time we finish off this interview. But before we part, do you have any suggestions or comments for me and my batch, the second year PhDs in physics in Ashoka?
Uh, the suggestion would be that you try and have a perspective. So by that I mean that you find out a lot. Don't be restricted to the problem that has been assigned to you. You discuss with your friends. There are areas of physics which are very exciting. I mean, right from the thing that as something like something as basic as what are the physical quantities that your cell phone can measure. You know, I mean, as simple as that. You should be you should know that your cell phone can measure magnetic fields, and
Right.
it can actually measure Earth's magnetic field, for that matter of fact. So
Right.
so these are, and you should feel excited about this. If you're not
Yeah.
excited about this, then how can you not be excited that your cell phone can measure luminosity, it can measure the
Hmm.
Earth's magnetic field, it can measure acceleration due to gravity? I mean, who could think that a cell phone can do all this? And
Right.
then you should go and see that, okay, let's find out why it can do that, and what are the physics principles that enables us to do that, and
Hmm.
be excited about that. The fact that we have reached a situation where we can do all this
Yep.
with the same device means that we have done something good. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something really interesting in physics. uh, and you should feel excited. If you're not excited, then there's something. I mean, you should feel excited. You should actually ask why
Right.
you're not feeling excited. And so that's the thing that I would say, that you should develop a perspective, not just in theoretical physics. So you're doing a PhD in theoretical physics, but you
Hmm.
should feel excited about these little simple things as well, which are connected with um, um, everyday things.
Hmm.
Um, so if somebody asks you, why are you doing theoretical physics? What is it good for? You should just point at the cell phone and say that this is what you can do. And do you know that to actually accurately do GPS, you require general relativistic correction?
Exactly.
So
Well,
you
this has
know,
been a very simple argument for me every time everyone asks me, why are
yes.
you doing this?
Yeah, exactly. So these kind of things you can definitely say. And uh, there is this very nice book by one of the directors of the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, which is called the usefulness of useless knowledge. It's by Flexner. It's called by Flexner. I would strongly encourage that
Oh, I'm
you
surely read.
students who are working on theoretical physics, working
Hmm.
in theoretical physics, you should read that book, and then you should actually feel that you should not constantly ask where can I find an application for this,
Hmm.
because that is not the point. The point is to have fun. The
Yeah.
applications will come later. Maybe it will take 50 years before the application is found.
Right.
So that is something that I think we are missing out at this generation, because you're constantly surrounded by people who are asking you what is it good for,
Exactly.
and you are not bold enough to answer that, I don't know what it is good for. I'm just
Exactly.
having fun. Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is important.
All right. Okay. Right. Thank you so much for your time, and thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much
much.
for your enlightening answers. They were wonderful. And yeah, anything else you want to say, or we can?
No, thanks. It was nice to talk to you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Professor.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.